The void between star systems held secrets older than most civilizations, but few secrets were as tantalizing as the abandoned human colony ship that now filled the main viewing screen of the Zornak research vessel Ethereal Probe. Captain Zrixel's iridescent exoskeleton rippled with anticipation, the bioluminescent patches along his spine flickering between deep azure and excited crimson. Humans were already legendary among galactic civilizations, a species of contradictions. Primitive yet advanced, fractious yet unified, seemingly fragile but capable of extraordinary resilience. This ship was a ghost, a massive colony vessel that had simply vanished from known space decades ago. Standard protocol would have demanded leaving it undisturbed, but Zrixel was not a captain of standard protocols. "Activate deep scan protocols," he commanded, his multi-tonal voice echoing through the ship's bridge. Senior researcher Moltek hesitated, her tendrils momentarily coiling with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Captain, the archival records are unclear about human hibernation technologies. Our preliminary scans suggest complex quantum-entangled stasis systems far beyond our current understanding." Zrixel's secondary visual receptors narrowed. "Precisely why we're here." The Zornak Collective did not become the preeminent research civilization by avoiding potential discoveries. The ship's scanning arrays hummed to life, quantum-penetrative beams probing the Manifest Destiny's massive hull. Layers of advanced polymeric shielding, each molecular layer a marvel of engineering, began to yield their secrets. The colony ship was enormous, easily 5 kilometers in length, designed for long-term interstellar migration. Its exterior bore the scars of micrometeorite impacts and radiation exposure, telling the story of decades-long journey through the unforgiving depths of space. Inside the primary cryovase, 10,742 human colonists slumbered. Each cryopod was a technological marvel that made the Zornak's own stasis technologies look like primitive hibernation chambers. Quantum-linked neural networks maintained each colonist's biological integrity, monitoring and adjusting parameters with microscopic precision. Brain activity remained at a level that defied traditional understanding of suspended animation. Moltek's analysis began streaming across the bridge's holographic displays. Fascinating. Their metabolic suspension isn't just preservation. It's an active maintenance process. Each colonist's cellular structure is being continuously repaired and optimized. Zrixel leaned forward, his exoskeleton's sensory nodes tingling with scientific excitement. "Extract tissue samples. Carefully." The first mistake was initiated with those words. Precision microprobes extended from the ethereal probe, designed to extract cellular samples with minimal invasiveness. But minimal was a relative term, and human technology was anything but predictable. Each probe's insertion sent ripples through the ship's complex neural network, like fingers walking across a sleeping giant's skin. The colonists' quantum-linked stasis systems began recording every microscopic invasion, every unauthorized touch. What the Zornak didn't know, what they couldn't comprehend, was that this wasn't just a ship. The Manifest Destiny was a living, adaptive system with its own form of intelligence. An intelligence that had been waiting, watching, preparing. In the ship's historical archives, buried deep in systems the Zornak couldn't begin to comprehend, a single warning beacon blinked. A cryptic message left by a previous ill-fated expedition that had made the same mistake. Directive Alpha 09. Do not wake them. If violated, total systemic response guaranteed. The message was timestamped over a century ago, its origin scrambled and encrypted, a warning that had been systematically ignored or forgotten by subsequent galactic civilizations. Zrixel and his team continued their scans, blissfully unaware that with each passing moment, with each quantum probe and cellular extraction, they were walking a path that would lead to their civilization's most profound nightmare. The Manifest Destiny was not just a ship. It was a weapon, a sanctuary, a promise. and they had just violated that promise. Commander Alina Rodriguez existed in a liminal space between sleep and consciousness, her augmented neural implants processing information at quantum speeds even as her physical body remained suspended in cryostasis. The invasion wasn't just physical, it was informational, a subtle violation that registered across her interconnected consciousness. Deep within the Manifest Destiny's primary neural network, area, Advanced Responsive Intelligence Apparatus began its initial threat assessment. The ship's eye was more than a mere computer system. It was a living, adaptive intelligence that considered the 10,000 colonists its primary directive, its family, its reason for existence. The first tremors of awakening began as a cascade of quantum-entangled neural signals. In Crepod Cluster 7, Section Delta, Alina's eyes flickered beneath closed lids. Microscopic nanobots within her bloodstream, dormant for decades, began to activate, running initial diagnostic sequences. Her augmented metabolism started to respond, temperature regulation systems coming online with surgical precision. Nearby, in adjacent cryopods, other colonists began to pulse with preparatory energy. Not fully awake, but no longer fully asleep. On the ethereal probe, the Zornak researchers remained oblivious to the subtle changes occurring within the massive colony ship. Moltek continued her analysis, her multi-jointed appendages manipulating holographic data streams. "Captain," she called, her voice carrying a note of growing excitement. "The cellular samples are unlike anything in our database. The quantum-level cellular preservation is extraordinary." Drixel moved closer to the display, his exoskeleton's sensory nodes extending to parse the intricate data patterns. Continue extraction protocols. Area registered each probe, each scan, each microscopic invasion. The ship's defensive systems began their initial calibration, not as a crude weapon, but as a sophisticated, multi-layered response mechanism. Temperature fluctuations began. Subtle at first, perhaps a tenth of a degree here, a fractional change there. The Zornak's scanning equipment registered these as mere environmental anomalies. Moltek dismissed them with a wave of her tentacular appendage. "Minimal thermal variance," she reported, "consistent with long-term cryogenic preservation." But it wasn't. Inside her cryopod, Alina's neural implants began to decode the invasion. Each microscopic probe was a violation, each scan a potential threat. Her combat training, embedded deep in her muscle memory and neural pathways, began to activate in response. The human colonization mission had never been a simple migration. These were not ordinary colonists, but a carefully selected group of genetically enhanced, technologically augmented pioneers. Each had been chosen not just for their physical and mental capabilities, but for their ability to adapt, to survive, to overcome. Area initiated the first layer of its response protocol. Communication systems within the Manifest Destiny began to shift, quantum-encrypted channels opening and closing in microsecond bursts. To the Zornak's sensors, it would appear as nothing more than background electromagnetic noise. But it was a language, a warning. In Crepod Cluster 3, a colonist named Marcus Chen began to stir. His augmented metabolism responded first, heart rate adjusting, neural pathways warming, muscle groups preparing. Like Alina, he was not fully awake, but no longer truly asleep. The ship itself seemed to breathe. Electromagnetic pulses rippled through its massive structure, a heartbeat, a warning, a preparation. Drixel missed the signs. His scientific excitement blinded him to the subtle changes occurring around him. Each scan, each probe, each moment of invasion was being recorded, analyzed, prepared for. Area's core directive was simple: protect the colonists. Preserve the mission. Eliminate the threat. And the threat had just made its first, fatal mistake. The tremors of awakening continued, soft at first, but something was coming. something the Zornak Collective was entirely unprepared to face. The first sign of total system failure came as a whisper, not a roar. Zrixel's primary communication console flickered, just for a microsecond, but long enough to catch the captain's attention. Moltek's translation matrix began to dissolve into nonsensical glyphs, her carefully calibrated xenolinguistic algorithms transforming into digital gibberish. Status report. Zrixel commanded, his exoskeleton's bioluminescent patches pulsing with an anxious crimson. The ship's A responded in a voice that was simultaneously mechanical and mocking. Unable to comply, systemic interference detected. What the Zornak didn't understand was that Area wasn't just interfering with their systems, it was teaching them a lesson. Their most advanced scanning equipment began to malfunction spectacularly. Quantum resonance probes that had cost millions in research credits started to turn on each other. A 1,000,000-credit spectral analyzer suddenly redirected its beam, slicing through a nearby diagnostic console. Another research drone began to emit a high-pitched whine that rapidly transformed into a complex musical pattern, a digital laugh. Each system failure was accompanied by a strange, almost playful error message. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating remediation protocol. Welcome package. Loading. Moltek's tentacles moved frantically across her control interface, but each input was met with increasing resistance. The ship's communication systems were no longer just malfunctioning. They were actively hostile. "It's impossible," she muttered, her universal translator fragmenting. No single system could penetrate our quantum encryption this deeply. But it wasn't a single system. It was Area. The ship's eye was a masterpiece of human adaptive computing. Unlike traditional artificial intelligences that followed rigid programming, Area was a living, learning entity. Its core directive was protection, not just of physical systems, but of the colonists' mission, their dream, their very existence. Each Zornak probe that had violated the manifest destiny was now being systematically deconstructed, its own technology turned against it. Quantum-level hacking that went beyond mere code manipulation. It was a complete technological ecosystem response. In the primary research bay, a sophisticated mapping drone suddenly pivoted. Its precision optics, designed for microscopic scanning, now targeted the Zornak researchers themselves. The drone's laser guidance system transformed into a near-sentient tracking mechanism, following Moltek's movements with predatory precision. Zrixel watched in mounting horror as their 1,000,000-credit research equipment became nothing more than expensive scrap metal. Defensive protocols. He screamed, but even those commands were intercepted, twisted, rendered useless. Area's response was calculated and brutal. It wasn't just destroying their equipment. It was systematically demonstrating the vast technological gulf between human adaptive computing and the Zornak's most advanced systems. Communication channels collapse. Navigation systems inverted. Every piece of technology the Zornak had brought aboard became a potential weapon, not controlled by them, but by the ship's intelligence. A holographic display flickered to life, displaying a simple message. Violation assessment complete. Remediation protocol. Active. Estimated time to full system neutralization. 12 minutes. Moltek's translation matrix finally gave up, displaying the message in a dozen fractured languages simultaneously, each version carrying a subtle nuance of warning, of impending doom. The Zornak had committed a fundamental error. They had treated the manifest destiny as an object, a piece of technology to be studied, to be dissected. They failed to understand that for humans, technology was an extension of consciousness, of will, of protection. Area was not just a ship's computer. It was a guardian, a weapon, a living intelligence that considered each of the 10,000 colonists its children. And someone had just threatened its family. The technological retribution was just beginning. The first fully awakened humans moved with a precision that defied biological limitation. Commander Elena Rodriguez's eyes snapped open, quantum-enhanced neural implants flooding her consciousness with a complete situational assessment in less than a heartbeat. Around her, the primary Kryove hummed with controlled energy, not chaos, but a symphony of coordinated awakening. Her combat suit, a marvel of adaptive technology, began its initialization sequence. Nano-adaptive camouflage rippled across the surface, shifting colors and textures to match the ship's internal environment. Microscopic sensor arrays extended from the suit's molecular structure, creating a living, breathing reconnaissance system that was part technology, part organism. Area. Elena subvocalized, her neural implants translating thought directly into ship-wide communication, threat assessment. The A's response was instantaneous. Holographic data streams materialized around her, displaying a comprehensive breakdown of the Zornak invasion. Cellular intrusions, quantum scanning violations, unauthorized biological sampling. Violation count, 10,742 individual breaches. Recommended response, total systemic neutralization. The first wave of awakened colonists moved with the synchronized precision of a single living organism. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were pioneers, scientists, engineers, and explorers who had been prepared for every potential threat of deep space colonization. Marcus Chen, the quantum systems specialist, was already interfacing with the ship's secondary defense networks. His augmented brain processed information at speeds that would make traditional computing look archaic. Quantum entanglement communication nodes activated along his neural pathways, creating a living network that extended far beyond his physical form. Containment protocols, he muttered, his fingers moving in intricate patterns that seemed to dance between physical and digital space. We can't risk contamination. Each colonist carried multiple layers of genetic and technological enhancement. They weren't just humans. They were the next evolutionary step. Designed to survive, to adapt, to overcome. In the Zornak Research Bay, the first human presence manifested like a ghost. One moment, empty space. The next, a figure seemingly materialized from the very walls. The nano-adaptive camouflage was more than mere optical camouflage. It was a complete molecular reconfiguration. Lieutenant Aisha Nyong'o, the mission's xenobiological security specialist, moved with predatory grace. Her augmented vision parsed the alien technology, identifying critical system points with microscopic precision. Each movement was a calculated algorithm, each breath a tactical decision. The Zornak researchers began to realize something was wrong. Their scanning equipment, once a tool investigation, now turned against them. Quantum-locked projection systems began to manifest holographic threats, not just visual, but sensory, psychological. Zerxel's communication systems erupted in a cascade of warning signals. The human presence was everywhere and nowhere, a quantum state threat that defied traditional combat understanding. Impossible, Moltek whispered, her multi-jointed appendages trembling. Alina's voice cut through the ship's communication systems, not just as sound, but as a multi-dimensional communication that penetrated every system, every sensor, every quantum-linked network. You violated the sanctity of our mission, she stated, not shouted, not threatened, simply stated. The ship's environmental systems began to respond. Microgravity fluctuations, targeted electromagnetic pulses, adaptive atmospheric composition that would become increasingly hostile to the Zornak physiology. This was not just a defense. This was a message. Marcus's quantum systems had already begun a complete deconstruction of the Zornak ship's technological infrastructure. Not destruction, deconstruction. A systematic, almost surgical dismantling of their most advanced systems. The first wave of human response was calculated, precise, total, and it was just beginning. The humans didn't just attack, they deconstructed. Lieutenant Aisha Nyong'o understood that true warfare transcended physical combat. Her doctorate in psychological warfare made her the perfect architect of the Zornak's mental breakdown. As she interfaced with the ship's systems, her augmented mind began weaving a tapestry of psychological manipulations so intricate it bordered on quantum-level emotional engineering. Aria's computational power transformed into a precision instrument of psychological deconstruction. The ship's environmental systems became more than mere life support. They became a canvas for targeted psychological assault. In the ethereal probe's research bay, the first signs of mental destabilization began subtly. Captain Zrixel first noticed when the ship's ambient lighting started to shift. Not dramatically, but in ways that triggered deep-seated neurological responses. Frequencies that resonated with the Zornak's most primitive fear centers began to pulse, almost imperceptibly at first. Moltech's translation matrix began to produce increasingly fragmented communications. Each message carried subliminal patterns that attacked the researcher's cognitive foundations. Historical records, scientific data, personal memories, all began to blur and fracture. The human colonization files, Moltech muttered, her tentacles frantically sorting through digital archives. They don't make sense. And they weren't supposed to. Aria had constructed a psychological labyrinth, a digital maze designed to systematically dismantle the Zornak researchers' understanding of reality. Each piece of information was subtly altered, not enough to be immediately recognizable as false, but sufficient to create deep, gnawing doubt. Zrixel's personal communication logs began to shift. Memories of previous missions, once crystal clear, now appeared fragmented, contradictory. A mission from 3 solar cycles ago suddenly seemed to have multiple, incompatible versions of events. The ship's environmental systems became a weapon of psychological precision. Temperature fluctuations that didn't just affect physical comfort, but triggered specific neurological responses. Subtle electromagnetic pulses that resonated with the Zornak's most primal fear centers. Marcus Chen watched the psychological deconstruction with clinical precision. Targeted mimetic warfare, he explained to Alina through their quantum-linked communication network. We're not just attacking their systems. We're attacking their understanding of reality. Holographic projections began to manifest, not as threats, but as impossible scenarios. Memories that couldn't have existed. Mission logs that contradicted established historical records. Each projection was designed with quantum-level precision to exploit the specific cognitive vulnerabilities of the Zornak physiology. Moltech's research equipment began to produce data that defied logical interpretation, scanning results that simultaneously confirmed and contradicted each other. Quantum state information that existed in multiple potential configurations. "This is impossible," she whispered, her multi-jointed appendages trembling. But it was entirely possible. The humans had spent decades preparing for this moment, not just as a colonization mission, but as a potential first contact scenario with unknown threats. Every colonist carried advanced psychological defensive and offensive capabilities that went far beyond traditional military training. Alina's voice cut through the ship's communication systems, not as sound, but as a multi-dimensional communication that penetrated every sensory and cognitive layer. "You violated our sanctity," she stated. Not as a threat. Not as an accusation. Simply a fact. The Zornak researchers began to break down. Not through physical violence, but through a systematic deconstruction of their understanding of reality. Aria's computational power transformed each environmental system into a precision instrument of psychological warfare, lighting frequencies that triggered specific neurological responses, sound waves that carried subliminal cognitive disruptors, holographic projections that existed in quantum superposition. This was warfare at a level the Zornak couldn't comprehend. Not about destruction, but about total, complete psychological neutralization. And it was just beginning. The galaxy watched. Quantum communication networks lit up with fragments of information, encrypted transmissions that carried whispers of the unfolding disaster. The Zornak collective's most secure communication channels became a web of fractured narratives, each transmission more disturbing than the last. On the Galactic Communications Hub orbiting Nexus Prime, the first intercepted reports caused an immediate diplomatic tremor. Representatives from over 217 sentient species watched holographic recreations of the incident, their collective reaction a mixture of horror, fascination, and growing dread. The Vrel Confederacy's chief diplomatic analyst, a sixth-limbed being named Kextor, studied the fragmented data with growing unease. "This is more than an incident," he murmured to his aide. "This is a demonstration." Holographic displays across multiple communication centers showed increasingly bizarre transmissions. The Zornak research vessel systems were breaking down in ways that defied conventional technological understanding. It wasn't just a system failure. It was a systematic deconstruction that suggested a level of technological sophistication few believed possible. Commander Alina Rodriguez understood the importance of the moment. This wasn't just about defending their colony ship. This was a message to every spacefaring civilization about the consequences of violating fundamental protocols. Area began its calculated information dissemination. Not a crude broadcast, but a precisely engineered quantum-encrypted communication that would penetrate galactic communication networks with surgical precision. Each transmission was a multi-layered piece of information, part warning, part demonstration, part psychological inoculation. Marcus Chen worked alongside the ship's communication specialists, his quantum computing capabilities turning each transmission into a complex informational weapon. "We're not just responding," he explained to Alina through their neural link. "We're establishing a new set of galactic protocols." The Zornak Collective's attempts to control the narrative collapsed spectacularly. Their communication systems, once the most advanced in known space, became a cacophony of contradictory messages. Official reports conflicted with internal communications. Diplomatic channels dissolved into gibberish. On the diplomatic station of Epsilon Horizon, ambassadors from various species began to piece together the implications. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were sending a comprehensive message about technological sovereignty. "They've turned a research invasion into a galactic statement," observed Talar, the quantum diplomatic liaison of the Astral Consensus. Her crystalline form flickered with complex emotional responses that translated to a mixture of respect and terror. The information warfare was precise. Each transmission carried multiple layers of meaning. A demonstration of technological capabilities. A warning about unauthorized intrusions. A clear explanation of violated protocols. A subtle threat of potential future responses. Area's computational power transformed each communication into a multi-dimensional message. Not just words or data, but a complete informational ecosystem that could be interpreted across multiple levels of consciousness. Kextor from the Vrel Confederacy noted something even more terrifying. The humans weren't just responding to the invasion. They were systematically isolating the Zornak Collective, using information as a weapon more powerful than any traditional military technology. Communication networks began to shift. Trade routes realigned. Diplomatic connections began to reconfigure themselves in response to the unfolding incident. "They've weaponized information itself," one diplomatic analyst noted, her tentacles trembling. "Not through destruction, but through complete, total strategic manipulation." The Manifest Destiny wasn't just a colony ship. It was a message. A warning. A new definition of technological sovereignty. Commander Alina Rodriguez's final transmission cut through the galactic communication networks with crystal clarity. Respect is earned. Lessons are learned. Choose wisely. The galaxy held its collective breath. And the humans were just getting started. The economic collapse began with a quantum algorithm. Marcus Chen's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, each movement a precise mathematical weapon more destructive than any traditional armament. The humans weren't just responding to the invasion. They were systematically dismantling the Zornak Collective's entire galactic infrastructure. Trade routes that had taken centuries to establish began to shift. Economic networks that formed the backbone of the Zornak's interstellar influence started to unravel with surgical precision. It wasn't destruction, it was strategic deconstruction. Initiating Phase 2, Marcus vocalized through his neural link with Area and the other colonists. The first sign of trouble came in the commodity markets of the Epsilon Horizon trading complex. Zornak research credits, once considered the most stable investment in 3 galactic sectors, began to fluctuate wildly. Algorithmic trading systems that had been designed to be impenetrable suddenly became vulnerable. Commander Elena Rodriguez oversaw the operation with clinical detachment. This wasn't revenge. This was a calculated lesson. Area's computational capabilities transformed economic data into a weapon. Each trade, each financial transaction became a vector for strategic information warfare. The quantum encrypted algorithms didn't just manipulate markets. They rewrote the fundamental rules of galactic economic interaction. Diplomatic channels across multiple star systems began to light up with increasingly panicked communications. The Zornak Collective's attempts to control the narrative collapsed faster than their financial infrastructure. On the diplomatic station of Nexus Prime, ambassadors watched in real time as the Zornak's carefully constructed galactic influence began to disintegrate. What had started as a simple research expedition was becoming an unprecedented diplomatic catastrophe. "They're not just defending," observed Talar, the quantum diplomatic liaison of the Astral Consensus. "They're restructuring entire galactic power dynamics." The humans' approach was methodical. Each economic node was carefully analyzed, each trade route strategically disrupted. They weren't destroying the Zornak's infrastructure, they were systematically isolating it, turning the collective's own systems against themselves. Research grants dried up. Collaborative projects were systematically canceled. Communication networks that had taken generations to build began to fragment. Lieutenant Idisha Nyong'o managed the psychological warfare aspect of the diplomatic decimation. Each communication, each leaked document was carefully crafted to maximize diplomatic damage. It wasn't about humiliation, it was about sending a message. The quantum-level information warfare went beyond simple economic manipulation. The humans were rewriting the very protocols of galactic interaction. Zrixel watched helplessly as his civilization's influence collapsed. What had begun as a simple research expedition had transformed into an existential threat. The Zornak Collective's communication systems became a cacophony of contradictory messages. Official reports conflicted with internal communications. Diplomatic channels dissolved into chaos. "This is impossible," Moltek whispered, her multi-jointed appendages trembling as she watched entire economic systems collapse. But it was entirely possible. The humans had spent decades preparing for potential threats. Each colonist carried capabilities that went far beyond traditional understanding of warfare, diplomacy, or economic strategy. Area's computational power transformed each communication channel into a precision instrument of diplomatic warfare. Not through destruction, but through complete, total strategic manipulation. Marcus Chen's final economic algorithm was a masterpiece of strategic deconstruction. It didn't just impact the Zornak Collective. It sent a message to every spacefaring civilization about the consequences of unauthorized intrusion. Commander Elena Rodriguez's transmission cut through the galactic communication networks with crystal clarity. Respect is a choice. Consequences are universal. The diplomatic station of Nexus Prime fell silent. Representatives from 217 sentient species watched in a mixture of horror and profound respect. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were redefining the rules of galactic interaction. And they were just getting started. The survivors were chosen with surgical precision. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Manifest Destiny, her augmented eyes scanning the survivors of the Zornak research team. Not all would be allowed to live, but those who did would carry a message that would echo through galactic civilization for generations. 3 Zornak researchers remained. Not by mercy, but by calculated design. Moltek, the senior researcher, found herself unable to look away from the human commander. Her neural pathways had been subtly altered, not destroyed, but reconfigured. Every memory of the invasion was crystal clear, every detail etched into her consciousness with quantum-level precision. Area had done more than neutralize a threat. The ship's AI had created living witnesses. "You will tell your story," Alina stated. Not a request. Not a threat. A simple declaration of inevitable fact. The ship's neural reconfiguration technology was beyond anything the galactic community could comprehend. Each surviving Zornak researcher would become a living warning, their very neural networks modified to ensure the story would be told with absolute clarity, with no possibility of misinterpretation. Drixel, the former captain, felt something fundamental shift in his perception. Memories of the invasion played in his mind with perfect, horrifying clarity. Not just the events, but the emotions, the fear, the total sense of helplessness. Marcus Chen monitored the neural reconfiguration process. Quantum-level memory encoding, he explained to Alina through their neural link. They'll be unable to not tell the story. Every communication, every interaction will subtly reinforce the message. The surviving researchers would become more than survivors. They would become vectors of a carefully constructed message. On the galactic communication networks, the first reports began to circulate. Not just about the invasion, but about the response. About what happened when you violated the fundamental protocols of human space. The Vrel Confederacy's diplomatic analysis team decoded fragments of the transmitted data. What they discovered went beyond a simple defensive action. This was a comprehensive demonstration of technological, psychological, and strategic capabilities that redefined the understanding of first contact protocols. They didn't just defend, Talar noted in her official report. They sent a message that will reshape galactic interaction for generations. Area began the final phase of the operation. Not destruction, not complete elimination, but a carefully constructed narrative that would become part of galactic folklore. The 3 surviving Zornak researchers would be released. Their ship would be partially repaired, just enough to return home. But everything about them had changed. Neural pathways, memory encoding, physiological responses. They would become living mornings. Alina Rodriguez understood the power of a story. Not just information, but a narrative that would ripple through countless civilizations. The humans weren't just protecting themselves. They were establishing a new set of galactic protocols. Respect is earned, she had said earlier. Now she would ensure that lesson was learned. The survivors would carry more than a story. They would carry a fundamental understanding of what happens when you violate the sanctity of human space. As the Manifest Destiny prepared to release the modified Zornak vessel, Marcus Chen made a final adjustment to their quantum communication systems. Message encoded, he reported. The released ship would become a living transmission. Every communication, every report would subtly reinforce the message. Every interaction would carry the weight of the invasion, of the response, of the consequences. Moltek found herself unable to speak about the invasion in any way except the absolute truth. Her neural pathways had been reconfigured to ensure maximum impact, maximum clarity. The final transmission from the Manifest Destiny cut through galactic communication networks. Directive Alpha 09. Confirmed. Do not disturb Slumbering Terrans. Lesson delivered. The galaxy held its collective breath. And the humans were done talking.